I never imagined I'd return from serving 3 tours overseas only to fight a war for my family's land right here at home. When I received that call from my neighbor, Frank, telling me there were bulldozers tearing up my grandfather's property, I thought there must be some kind of mistake. They're building houses, Marcus. Dozens of them. There's signs everywhere for Pinecrest Estates, and they've already cleared half the eastern forest. After my grandfather passed away last winter, I inherited his 180-acre ranch outside of Mill Creek. The sprawling property had been in our family for generations, a place where I'd spent childhood summers fishing in the creek and hunting in the woods with my grandfather teaching me about respecting the land. 5 years in the Marines, followed by contractor work abroad, had kept me away, but this land was my legacy, and now my future. I threw my duffel bag in my truck and drove straight from the airport to Mill Creek, breaking speed limits the entire way. 6 hours later, I turned onto the gravel road leading to my grandfather's farmhouse and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. The peaceful countryside I remembered was now filled with the roar of heavy machinery. Dust clouds rose above the trees as I approached the eastern section of the property. My heart sank when I crested the hill. A fleet of bulldozers and excavators were carving into soil that had been in my family for over a century. Workers in hard hats swarmed around, setting markers and clearing ancient oak trees that my great-grandfather had planted. A massive sign stood near the road: Future Home of Pinecrest Estates. 96 luxury homes starting at $750,000. I parked my truck and approached a woman inspecting blueprints on the hood of a gleaming black SUV. She wore an expensive-looking gray pantsuit despite the dusty surroundings, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Excuse me," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What's happening on my property?" The woman looked up from her blueprints, her eyes narrowing as she assessed me. Military haircut still growing out. Tan face, worn boots. Her smile was practiced and cold. "I'm Victoria Harrington, president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association and Development Group," she said, extending a manicured hand that I didn't take. "And you are?" "Marcus Reeves. This is my property. My grandfather, Samuel Reeves, owned this ranch. He passed away last winter, and I inherited everything. What are you doing on my land?" Victoria's smile didn't waver, but something flashed behind her eyes. "Well, Mr. Reeves, there must be some misunderstanding. Pinecrest Development purchased this eastern parcel last year. We have all necessary permits and approvals from the county. Construction began 3 weeks ago." "That's impossible," I said, feeling heat rise in my face. "My grandfather would never sell this land. This ranch has been in our family for 4 generations." Victoria reached into her SUV and pulled out a leather portfolio. "Perhaps he didn't tell you. The sale was finalized 8 months ago while you were—" She paused, glancing at my military bearing. "Otherwise occupied. We've been planning this development for quite some time." She slid a document toward me, a deed transfer with what appeared to be my grandfather's signature at the bottom. The date listed was during his final months when his health had been declining, but his mind had remained sharp as ever. "This isn't right," I insisted, studying the paper. The signature looked close to my grandfather's, but something seemed off. My grandfather would have told me if he was selling half the ranch. He knew this land was my future. "Well, Mr. Reeves," Victoria said, taking back the document, "I understand this must be difficult, coming home to discover changes. But I assure you, everything is perfectly legal. We've invested millions in this development already." She handed me a business card with the Pinecrest logo embossed in gold. "You're welcome to have your attorney contact our legal department, but I promise you'll be wasting your time. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a schedule to maintain." She turned away dismissively, already dialing a number on her phone, leaving me standing in the dust of what used to be my family's east pasture. Something wasn't right about that signature, about any of this. My grandfather had promised this land would always stay in our family. Back at the ranch house, Frank was waiting on the porch, his weathered face creased with concern. He'd been my grandfather's foreman for 30 years and knew every inch of this property. "They showed up about a month after the funeral," he explained, handing me a cold beer as we sat on the porch. "Sam would have been furious. He kept saying they were trying to steal what wasn't theirs to take. Did he ever mention selling any part of the ranch? I asked. Frank shook his head firmly. Never. Just the opposite. The week before he went into the hospital for the last time, he was in his study for hours, said he needed to find something important to protect the ranch. I figured it was just the medication talking. I hadn't been through my grandfather's study yet. The room remained exactly as he'd left it. Maps of the property on the walls, his old oak desk in the center, shelves lined with leather-bound ledgers documenting rainfall, cattle counts, and crop yields going back decades. The study smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. Grandpa had been meticulously organized, tracking everything about the ranch in his neat handwriting. Where would he have kept important documents? I started with the filing cabinet, pulling out folders organized by year. Nothing about land sales or Pinecrest estates. For hours, I searched through drawers and boxes, finding water rights documents, mineral assessments, grazing permits, but nothing explaining why bulldozers were tearing up our east pasture. Night fell, and my eyes grew tired from reading faded papers by lamplight. As I leaned back in my grandfather's chair, frustrated, my boot hit something under the desk. The floorboard sounded hollow. Kneeling down, I noticed one board was slightly shorter than the others. I pried it up with my pocket knife, revealing a hidden compartment containing a metal lockbox. The key was taped to the underside of the desk drawer. With hands that suddenly trembled, I opened the box to find several aged documents. The original ranch deed, my grandfather's will naming me his sole heir, and something unexpected. A detailed survey of the property dated 1973, with boundaries clearly marked in my grandfather's handwriting. But what caught my eye was a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For Marcus, when they come for the land." My throat tightened as I broke the seal and unfolded a letter written in my grandfather's familiar script. "If you're reading this," it began, "then they've made their move sooner than I expected." My hands trembled as I read my grandfather's words, written from beyond the grave. The letter was dated just 2 weeks before he passed. "Marcus, if you're reading this, they've made their move for our land. For years, Harrington Development has been trying to get their hands on the eastern section of our ranch. They've offered to buy it numerous times, but I always refused. This land isn't just dirt and trees. It's our heritage, paid for with the sweat and blood of generations of Reeves men, including your father." During my last hospital stay, a man named James Harrington visited me repeatedly. He claimed he needed a signature for a road easement, but brought different papers each time. I may be old, but I'm not a fool. I never signed away our land. If they claim I did, it's a damn lie. Look at the original survey from 1973 and compare it to what's recorded at the county now. The proof is in the boundaries. Also, there's something about this land they don't want you to know. Something I discovered years ago but kept quiet for our protection. The eastern creek that runs through our property feeds directly into Mill Creek Reservoir, which supplies water to 3 counties. That makes it federally protected watershed land. No development can legally happen there without extensive environmental studies, which I guarantee they haven't done. Your father would be proud of the man you've become. Use what I've left you wisely. This land is your birthright. The letter was signed simply, Grandpa. I spread the 1973 survey across the desk and studied it carefully. According to this document, our property extended nearly a quarter-mile further east than I'd realized. The boundary wasn't the dirt road where the Pinecrest sign stood, it was the limestone ridge beyond it. If this survey was correct, Pinecrest wasn't just building close to our property line, they were building entirely on Reeves' land. I pulled out my phone and searched for Harrington Development. Their website showed dozens of luxury communities across 3 states, with James Harrington and his daughter Victoria smiling confidently in professional photos. Their company motto read, "Building exclusive communities for exclusive people." Further searching revealed that James Harrington was also on the county zoning board. His brother-in-law was a county commissioner. The pieces were starting to fit together. This wasn't just a land grab, it was a calculated operation by people who knew how to work the system. Sleep evaded me that night. At dawn, I knew what I had to do. First, I needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. I needed someone who couldn't be bought by the Harringtons. Then I needed to understand exactly what they were planning with Pinecrest Estates. If they thought they could steal my family's legacy, they were about to learn a painful lesson about messing with a combat veteran who had nothing left to lose. By 8 a.m., I was sitting in the waiting room of Rebecca Chen's law office in downtown Mill Creek. She wasn't from around here. She'd moved from Chicago 5 years ago, which meant she had no ties to local politics or the Harrington family. According to online reviews, she specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for being relentless. So you believe Pinecrest Estates is building on land that legally belongs to you? Rebecca asked after I explained my situation. She was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses, but her office walls displayed impressive credentials. I spread my grandfather's documents across her desk. These are the original surveys from 1973, approved by the county surveyor. Compare them to what's currently recorded. Rebecca studied both sets of papers, tracing the boundary lines with her finger. Her eyebrows raised higher with each passing minute. "This is unusual," she finally said. "According to these original documents, your property extends significantly further east than what's currently recorded. That would include not just the active construction site, but also the land where they've already constructed the Pinecrest Community Center and model homes." "Exactly," I confirmed. "And there's more. My grandfather's letter mentions this is protected watershed land. The creek there feeds directly into the reservoir." Rebecca removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. A boundary dispute of this magnitude combined with potential environmental violations won't be simple to resolve. First, we need to understand how and when these changes occurred in the official record. She called the county assessor's office, putting the call on speaker after navigating through several departments. We learned something shocking. A minor adjustment to our eastern boundary had been recorded in 1997, supposedly a 20-foot easement for utilities. But in 2022, during my grandfather's illness, a much more substantial change appeared, reducing the property by nearly 60 acres. The documentation showed my grandfather's signature, but the date coincided with his second heart surgery, a time I knew he had been heavily medicated in the hospital. "This doesn't match his handwriting from other documents," I said, comparing signatures. "And he physically couldn't have been at the county office that day. I was on a video call with him from Afghanistan. He was in his hospital bed." Rebecca's expression turned serious. "That would constitute forgery and fraud, but proving it won't be easy after all this time, especially against someone with Harrington's connections." She tapped her pen thoughtfully against her desk. "What do you want out of this, Marcus? Money? Your land back?" "I want what's rightfully mine," I said firmly. "And I want whoever falsified those documents to face consequences." Rebecca nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "Then let's start by filing for an emergency injunction to halt all construction immediately. Then we'll petition the court to recognize the original boundaries based on these historic surveys. We'll need a professional surveyor to verify these old maps." As Rebecca prepared the emergency filing, I realized I needed more ammunition. The Harringtons wouldn't give up easily. They had millions invested in this development. If this was going to be war, I needed to know my enemy's weaknesses. I spent the next day at the county records office, requesting everything they had on Harrington Development and Pinecrest Estates. The clerk, an older woman named Dorothy, raised an eyebrow when I mentioned the Harringtons but said nothing as she brought me file after file. Hours later, hidden in a back corner of the records room with stacks of documents surrounding me, I discovered what I was looking for. Pinecrest wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a complex web of LLCs and holding companies. The same names appeared throughout: James Harrington, Victoria Harrington, County Commissioner Edward Wilson, Planning Board Director Michael Grant, and two others I didn't recognize. But the most damning document was from just 2 months ago: a loan approval for $22 million to finance Pinecrest Estates, with the land itself listed as collateral. My land. I took photos of everything with my phone and continued digging. Building permits had been fast-tracked through the system, environmental impact studies waived, zoning exceptions granted, all approved by officials with direct connections to the Harringtons. My next stop was the offices of the Mill Creek Monitor, our local newspaper. The editor, Dave Mulligan, had gone to high school with my father. When I told him I was investigating potential fraud involving the Harringtons and county officials, his journalistic instincts perked up. I can't publish accusations without evidence, he warned, but I've been curious about how quickly this development moved through approvals. Most projects take years to clear all the regulatory hurdles. Pinecrest took months. Back at the ranch, I found Frank talking to another neighbor, Elaine Winters, whose property bordered our western boundary. Those Harrington people tried to bully me into selling last year, she said when I mentioned Pinecrest. When I refused, suddenly I was getting citations from the county for code violations on my horse barn, a building that's been there for 30 years. She shook her head in disgust. 3 of my neighbors sold out under similar pressure, always for less than market value, always to companies I later discovered were connected to Harrington development. A pattern emerged. Find vulnerable landowners, harass them with fines and regulations, force them to sell cheap, develop the land, and make millions. My grandfather had been their latest target, but he'd been one step ahead. My phone rang. Rebecca Chen. The judge granted our emergency injunction, she said, her voice triumphant. Construction has to stop immediately until a hearing next week, but brace yourself, Marcus. This is going to get ugly fast. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a small victory. Then I drove back to the construction site with the court order in hand. The workers were packing up for the day when I arrived. Victoria's black SUV still sat near the site office. She came out as I approached, phone to her ear as usual. When she saw me, her expression hardened. Construction stops now, I said, handing her the court order. Legal boundaries are in dispute. Victoria scanned the court order, her perfect composure cracking slightly. The document trembled almost imperceptibly in her manicured hands. This is ridiculous, yes, she snapped, thrusting the papers back at me. We have every approval we need based on legal county records. Legal records that appear to have been falsified, I replied calmly. My grandfather was in the hospital the day this supposed land transfer was signed. I have medical records to prove it. For the first time, uncertainty flashed in her eyes, quickly replaced by cold determination. This little stunt will cost you, she said quietly. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do, I said, feeling a surge of confidence. 6 names on dozens of business filings, a $22 million loan using stolen land as collateral. County officials fast-tracking approvals for projects they secretly invest in. Environmental studies mysteriously waived for a development on protected watershed land. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. The look on her face was worth every hour I'd spent digging through dusty records. We can be reasonable, she said, her voice steady but lower now. Perhaps you'd consider a generous offer for the remaining ranch land. 7 figures, immediate payment. Not interested. Everyone has a price. Her smile returned, confident and predatory. Think about it. You don't even live here anymore. What do you care about some old dirt and trees? This old dirt has been in my family for 4 generations, I replied. Men have died protecting it. It's not for sale at any price. I turned to leave, feeling her eyes boring into my back. As I reached my truck, she called out, Commissioner Wilson is my uncle. Judge Parker played football with my father. You think your little injunction will last? You're nobody in this county. I drove away, her words echoing in my mind. She was right about one thing. I was an outsider now. But she'd overlooked something important. My grandfather had been respected even by those who disagreed with him. He'd spent his entire life building connections in Mill Creek, and he'd left me more than just land. Back at the ranch house, I returned to my grandfather's study. If he had anticipated this fight, what else had he prepared? I searched more carefully, examining every folder, every notebook. In a binder labeled County Fair Committee 2017, I found dozens of photos of my grandfather with neighbors, local business owners, and families who'd known him for decades. Each photo had names written on the back. These weren't just memories, they were connections. People who might stand with me against the Harringtons. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Zoning violation at your property. Fine $750. Pinecrest compliance. Attached was a photo of my grandfather's old tractor shed on my own property. This was how it started, the pattern Elaine had described. Harassment by paperwork. But unlike the others, I knew their game now, and I had something they didn't expect. My grandfather's meticulous records and my own training in unconventional warfare. True to Victoria's word, by the next morning, the war had escalated. I woke to find 3 white SUVs with Pinecrest security painted on their doors, blocking my driveway. Men in tan uniforms stood by the vehicles, arms crossed. One stepped forward, handing me a thick envelope. Cease and desist notice from the Pinecrest Homeowners Association, he said flatly. You are ordered to withdraw all claims against the development or face legal action. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter claiming my documents were fake and that I was attempting to extort the development company. They demanded I pay $50,000 for damages to the community's reputation. You can't be serious, I said. The man shrugged. Just delivering the message. Have a nice day. He returned to his vehicle, but none of them moved. When I tried to leave for a meeting with Rebecca, I discovered they had placed large concrete barriers across the end of my driveway overnight. Sorry, sir, one guard said without looking sorry at all. This access point crosses Pinecrest Estate's common areas. It's been closed for safety reasons. I was trapped on my own property. I called the sheriff's office but was told they couldn't help with a civil dispute and suggested I contact my attorney. My phone rang. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. I hadn't given her my number. Good morning, Mr. Reeves, she said sweetly. Enjoying the view? This is harassment. You can't block access to my property. Actually, according to county records, the real ones, that driveway crosses Pinecrest common areas. We're within our rights to control access. You know those records are wrong. She laughed softly. Let me explain how this works in Mill Creek. The county commissioner is my uncle. The building inspector's daughter works for my father's company. The sheriff played high school football with my dad. I felt my stomach drop as she continued. By tomorrow, your ranch house will be cited for at least a dozen code violations. Your water might get shut off due to maintenance issues. Local contractors won't return your calls because they know better than to cross the Harringtons. That's illegal, I said, my combat training kicking in as I kept my voice calm while assessing the situation. That's small-town politics, she replied. You can't win this, but I'm reasonable. Drop your claims, sign over the disputed acres, and this all goes away. I'll even throw in a generous payment for your trouble. This isn't about money. It's always about money, dear veteran. Think it over. You have until tomorrow. She hung up. I stared at my phone, then at the security vehicles still blocking my driveway. They weren't leaving. True to Victoria's word, by afternoon a county inspector arrived to examine the ranch house. He found problems with everything, the wiring, the septic system, the porch railings. He handed me a list of violations that would cost thousands to fix, all needed immediately. As he left, another truck arrived. Workers put up signs along my property line. Future home of Pinecrest Estates, Phase 2, luxury living coming soon. My water pressure dropped to a trickle. When I called the utility company, they claimed there was maintenance work happening and couldn't say when it would be fixed. I was being systematically cut off, but they had made a critical error in their strategy. They were using tactics designed to work on civilians, not on someone who had survived 3 tours in combat zones. That night, I sat on the porch in darkness, watching the security lights sweeping across the fields where my grandfather once ran cattle. Their bulldozers sat silent in the distance, waiting to continue destroying the land my family had protected for generations. My phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. They've filed a countersuit claiming your documents are forgeries. Court date set for 2 months from now. They'll push to resume construction in the meantime. 2 months. By then, the houses would be half finished. The damage would be done. I needed to change tactics. I scrolled through the contacts in my grandfather's address book. One name caught my eye. Daniel Whitaker, Mill Creek's former county surveyor, now retired. According to my grandfather's notes, they'd been friends for over 40 years. As I considered calling him, headlights appeared on the long driveway. A car carefully maneuvered around the concrete barriers and approached the house. I tensed, wondering if Victoria was sending more trouble my way. The car parked, and a man stepped out whom I recognized immediately from the Pinecrest website. Michael Grant, the planning board director who had approved the development's permits. I shouldn't be here, he said nervously, glancing back at the security vehicles in the distance. If James Harrington finds out. Why are you here? I asked, not inviting him inside yet. Grant pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Because what they're doing isn't right. I've been on the planning board for 12 years. There are things you should see. I let him inside, away from watching eyes. At my kitchen table, he opened his laptop and showed me files that made my blood boil. Falsified environmental reports, backdated permits, emails between the Harringtons and county officials discussing how to expedite approvals while bypassing regulations. The creek on your property is protected watershed, Grant explained, pointing to a map. Development there requires federal approval, which they never got. They falsified the environmental impact study. I signed off on it because James Harrington threatened my job. Why show me this now? I asked. Because I'm not the only one who's tired of the Harringtons running this county like their personal kingdom, Grant said. When you showed up with those old surveys and started asking questions, it was the first time I've seen them worried. He pointed to another document. Look at this drainage plan. The 20 homes they've already built on what you say is your land. They're having serious foundation problems because they built on wetlands they weren't supposed to develop. Harrington cut corners on the drainage system. Those homeowners don't know it yet, but their houses are slowly sinking. As we talked, my phone buzzed with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. We support you against the Harringtons. The Mendozas, 37 Pinecrest Lane. They fined us $1,200 for planting native species instead of their approved landscaping. Our foundation is cracking. Harrington refuses to fix it. Can we help? The Johnsons. The promised community park was mysteriously rezoned for more houses. We want to join your fight. The Williams family. Grant smiled slightly. I may have shared your number with a few Pinecrest residents who've been looking for someone to stand up to Victoria and her father. For the first time since this battle began, I felt hope. The Harringtons had power, connections, and money. But they had also made enemies. Many of them. We need a plan, I said, and I think I know where to start. My water got shut off completely the next morning. The electricity followed that afternoon. I stood in my grandfather's kitchen, looking at the dark refrigerator. Victoria Harrington thought she could bully me off my own land by making life unbearable. She had another thing coming. I packed a bag and headed out the back way, an old logging trail my grandfather had shown me as a child. The Pinecrest security team hadn't found it yet. My first stop was Daniel Whitaker's house on the edge of town. The former county surveyor answered his door in a plaid bathrobe, coffee cup in hand. Recognition flashed in his eyes immediately. Good Lord, you're the spitting image of your father, he said, inviting me in. Sam told me you were overseas. I was. Now I'm fighting a different kind of battle, I replied, spreading my grandfather's 1973 survey on his kitchen table. I need to know if this is legitimate. Daniel put on his glasses and studied the document carefully. His weathered finger traced the boundary lines, stopping at the surveyor's stamp in the corner. This is my work, he said finally. I remember this survey. Your grandfather hired me when there was talk of putting a highway through the area. These boundaries are correct. Then why do the current county records show different property lines? Daniel's face darkened. Politics and money, son. Been happening in this county since James Harrington got elected to the zoning board 20 years ago. Small changes at first. A few feet here, an easement there. By the time folks notice, it's too late. I showed him the recent deed with my grandfather's signature. That's not Sam's signature, Daniel said immediately. I've seen his signature on hundreds of documents. This is a poor imitation. Armed with Daniel's written statement confirming the authenticity of the original survey, I spent the entire day meeting with Pinecrest homeowners. Sarah Jenkins, whose property backed up to the disputed area, invited several neighbors to her living room. Our homes are having foundation problems, Trevor Martinez explained while his wife Maria nodded. Cracks in the walls, doors that won't close properly. When we complained, Victoria said it was normal settling. It's not settling, I explained, showing them Grant's drainage plans. Your homes were built on protected wetlands without proper drainage systems. That's why the Harringtons were so desperate to get this land. They needed to control the water flow to hide their mistakes. By sunset, I had spoken with 32 families, all with similar stories, all afraid of Victoria and her father. Many had invested their life savings in homes that were now showing serious structural problems. What can we do? Sarah asked, desperation in her voice. We can't afford to lose our homes. I picked up my phone and called Rebecca Chen. Can the homeowners legally void their HOA contracts if the developers committed fraud? I asked. If we can prove the Harringtons knowingly built on protected wetlands without permits, and that they falsified documents to sell the homes. Absolutely, Rebecca replied. The homeowners would have grounds for a massive lawsuit. I looked around the room at the anxious faces of people who had been bullied and lied to. How would you like to form a new homeowners association? And I asked. One that actually protects homeowners instead of exploiting them? The vote was unanimous. Everyone was ready to fight back. As people filed out, energized and hopeful, I realized my grandfather had been right all along. The best trap isn't one your enemy walks into, it's one they build themselves without knowing it. For the next week, we prepared for what I called Operation Reclamation. Rebecca worked tirelessly, filing motions and gathering evidence. Daniel Whitaker brought in 2 surveyors from the state capitol who confirmed his assessment of the property boundaries. Dave Mulligan at the Mill Creek Monitor published a front-page story about questionable county land records, careful not to make direct accusations but raising pointed questions. The most damning evidence came from Grant. The falsified environmental reports showed the Harringtons had knowingly built homes on protected wetlands, then covered up the resulting structural problems. 20 families were now documenting every crack in their foundations, every stuck door, every water leak. And then, the moment we'd been waiting for, the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association meeting. According to their bylaws, Victoria was required to hold monthly meetings. She had canceled the previous 2, citing administrative issues, but couldn't delay any longer without violating state regulations. I stood outside the Pinecrest Community Center an hour before the meeting, dressed in my service uniform. It wasn't strictly necessary, but it sent a message that I'd fought for my country and wouldn't hesitate to fight for my land. Residents began arriving, many nodding to me in quiet solidarity. Our plan was simple. Let Victoria run her meeting, then introduce our evidence during the public comment period. Rebecca would be there to address the legal implications, and Dave Mulligan would document everything for tomorrow's paper. Victoria arrived 15 minutes late, her father James by her side. Neither acknowledged me as they swept into the building. The elder Harrington was tall and imposing, with the same cold eyes as his daughter. Inside, the community center was packed. Nearly every Pinecrest homeowner had shown up, along with several county officials who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Victoria stood at the podium, perfectly composed in an expensive blue suit, with her father and 4 board members seated behind her. Welcome to our July meeting, she began smoothly. We have several exciting announcements about our continued growth. I sat quietly at the back, letting her outline plans for new tennis courts and a swimming pool expansion. She was painting a picture of luxury and exclusivity while carefully avoiding any mention of the construction delays or the injunction. And now, she said finally, we have time for a few brief comments from residents. Please keep your remarks to under 2 minutes. This was our moment. But before I could stand, James Harrington stepped to the microphone. Before we take comments, I'd like to address the elephant in the room, however, he said, his voice carrying authority. Some of you may have heard rumors about boundary disputes affecting our expansion. I want to assure everyone that these claims are baseless. The individual making these accusations, he looked directly at me, is attempting to extort money from our community. Murmurs rippled through the room. Furthermore, James continued, I've just received word that Judge Parker has dismissed the temporary injunction. Construction will resume tomorrow morning. Victoria smiled triumphantly from behind her father. It was a power play designed to demoralize us before we could even present our case. I stood up and all eyes turned to me. Mr. Harrington, I said calmly, I believe you've been misinformed. I checked with the court clerk an hour ago. The injunction stands. James's face reddened slightly. The decision was just made. That's interesting, Rebecca cut in, standing beside me now, because I was on the phone with Judge Parker's clerk when you made that claim. No such ruling has been issued. The room fell silent as realization dawned. James Harrington had just been caught in a blatant lie. I walked to the front of the room, feeling the weight of every eye upon me. Victoria's perfect composure was cracking, her father's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. My name is Marcus Reeves, I said, addressing the packed room. My grandfather, Samuel Reeves, owned the land where your homes now stand. I'd like to show you something. I opened my laptop, connecting it to the projector. The screen displayed the original 1973 survey, side by side with the falsified county records. According to these legal documents, verified by 3 independent surveyors, Pinecrest Estates was built entirely on land that belongs to my family. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as I continued. The Harringtons knowingly falsified property records and built on protected watershed land without proper environmental permits. I clicked to the next slide, showing the drainage problems and structural issues. These aren't just boundary disputes. Your homes are experiencing foundation problems because they were built on wetlands that legally cannot be developed without extensive drainage systems, systems that were never installed to save costs. Victoria lunged for the microphone. This meeting is over. Everyone out. The board needs to discuss this privately. Actually, Rebecca interjected, according to your own HOA bylaws, Section 7.3, once a meeting has commenced, it cannot be terminated until all agenda items are addressed, including the full public comment period. A man in the second row stood up. My name is Robert Chen. I'm a structural engineer. I've been documenting the cracks in my foundation for months. The Harringtons told me it was normal settling, but these drainage plans confirm what I suspected. Our homes are slowly sinking into improperly developed wetlands. One by one, homeowners stood to share their stories. Sarah Jenkins displayed photos of water damage. The Martinez family described how their children's rooms had become uninhabitable due to mold from improper drainage. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an undeniable picture of fraud and negligence. James Harrington tried to regain control. These are baseless accusations. We have permits. Falsified permits, Michael Grant interrupted, standing up from his seat. As planning board director, I can confirm that environmental studies were falsified and dates were altered on official documents. The room erupted in angry shouts. Victoria's carefully curated community was unraveling before her eyes. Here's what happens next, I said when the room quieted. First, all construction on the disputed land stops permanently. Second, every homeowner whose property has been damaged by improper construction will be compensated through an escrow account we're establishing. Third, the protected wetlands will be restored and properly managed. Victoria's eyes narrowed. And who's going to pay for all this? You'll bankrupt the HOA. No, I replied calmly. Your family's development company will pay. We have documentation proving you knowingly committed fraud. You have 2 choices. Make this right, or face criminal charges and class action lawsuits from every homeowner here. 3 days later, the Harringtons capitulated. James Harrington resigned from the county zoning board. Victoria disappeared to their vacation home in another state. Their development company agreed to pay for all necessary repairs and establish a fund for ongoing maintenance of the wetlands. 6 months later, I stand on my grandfather's porch, now our community center, watching children play on the newly established nature trail that winds through the protected wetlands. The homes have been repaired, the drainage systems properly installed. The Mill Creek Homeowners Cooperative, no longer an association, meets here monthly to make decisions democratically. Frank walks up, handing me a cup of coffee. Your grandfather would be mighty proud, he says, gazing out at the land that remains in our family. He saved this place before I even knew it needed saving, I reply, thinking of his hidden documents and careful planning. In the distance, a blue heron rises from the restored marsh, soaring above homes, where people now live in harmony with the land. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or even a lawyer. It's the truth, carefully preserved and revealed at exactly the right moment. The Harringtons thought they could steal my inheritance and bully me off my own land. Instead, they walked straight into a trap that my grandfather had been setting for years. They built 96 homes on my property, only to discover they were caught in a legal nightmare of their own making. If you enjoyed this story of justice and standing up against corrupt developers, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more incredible true stories every week. I share stories about people who fought back against impossible odds and won, just like Marcus did. Leave a comment below about what you would have done in this situation. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.